Welcome to part 2 of the pubescent period, the female reproductive system. In this lesson, we are going to review on the different structures and functions of the female reproductive system. This is so we can get a better picture on how puberty impacts the female body. Let's get started. Here, we have an overview of the female reproductive system in frontal and sagittal view. The main and primary gonad of the female is the ovary. The role of the female is much more complex than that of the male, as her reproductive organs are designed to also nurture and protect a developing fetus during 9 months of pregnancy. Let's examine closely the structures of the female reproductive system, beginning with the external genitalia. The parts of the female reproductive system that are located outside of the vagina are called the external genitalia. This is also called the vulva. The mons pubis is a fatty, rounded area overlying the pubic symphysis. After puberty, this area will be covered with pubic hair. Running down from the mons pubis are two elongated skin folds called the labia majora. The hair-covered labia majora encloses a region called the vaginal vestibule. The vaginal vestibule contains the labia minora, which protects the external openings of the urethra and the vagina. Within the vestibule are the vestibular glands. These secrete fluid that moisten and lubricate the vaginal vestibule and opening during sexual arousal and coitus. Just positioned anterior to the vestibule is the clitoris, which is also known as the primary site of sexual arousal. Like the penis, the clitoris is composed of sensitive erectile tissue and is richly supplied with sensory nerve endings. The diamond-shaped region that includes the labial folds and the anus is what we call the perineum. Now, let's take a look at the internal structures of the female reproductive system. Let us begin with the ovaries. The ovaries are the primary female gonads, which, like the testes, produce both exocrine and endocrine products. The oocyte, or the ovum, will be the exocrine product, while the estrogen and progesterone hormones are the endocrine products. Internal view reveals many tiny sac-like structures called the ovarian follicles. These ovarian follicles consist of one immature egg called an oocyte. The oocyte is surrounded by follicle cells. As the egg matures, the follicle enlarges and becomes fluid-filled. This will now be known as a Graafian follicle. When a developing egg is mature, the follicle ruptures and ejects the egg. This phenomenon is called ovulation. We will look more into ovulation as we discuss about the menstrual cycle. After ovulation, the ruptured follicle becomes a very different looking structure. It will now be known as the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will be responsible for the progesterone secretion before eventually degenerating, prompting the ovulation process to start all over again. The ovary is secured to the walls of the pelvis, uterus, and peritoneum through the suspensory, ovarian, and the broad ligaments. Now, let's take a look at the duct system. Another name for the uterine tubes is the fallopian tubes. The fallopian tubes receive oocytes and convey the developing embryo toward the uterus. It has 3 sections: the infundibulum, the ampulla, and the isthmus. At the end of the fallopian tube, there are tiny finger-like projections that partially surround the ovary. These are called the fimbriae. The fimbriae will catch the ova that is released by the ovary during ovulation. It creates fluid currents which carry the released ovum to the uterine tube. As you can see, there is a space between the opening of the fallopian tube and the ovary. So yes, it is possible that many potential eggs become lost in the peritoneal cavity, where they just degenerate. You might also wonder, where is the site of the fertilization? It is most often in the ampulla of the fallopian tube. Once fertilization occurs, it takes approximately 3 to 4 days for the zygote, or a fertilized egg, to travel to the uterus. Located in the pelvis between the urinary bladder and the rectum is a hollow organ that receives, retains, and nourishes a fertilized egg. This organ is called the uterus. If the fallopian tube is the site of fertilization, then the uterus would be the site of implantation. The uterus is divided into 3 regions: the fundus, the body, and the cervix. It also has 3 layers: the perimetrium, or the outermost layer, the myometrium, or the muscle layer, which plays a very important role during labor, and the endometrium, which is the innermost layer and where implantation occurs. This layer is also the most vascular layer. During pregnancy, if fertilization occurs, the young embryo travels to the uterus and burrows itself in the endometrial lining of the uterus, where it will be nourished and protected. If the woman remains non-pregnant, the endometrial lining sloughs off periodically, usually around 28 days. This is a part of the menstrual cycle. The last inner structure we will talk about is the vagina. The vagina receives the erect penis and semen during coitus. Another main function of the vagina is to act as passageway for both the uterine secretions during menstruation and as well as the fetus during labor and delivery. Another name for the vagina is the birth canal. Additionally, unlike the penis, the vagina doesn't share the same passageway for the urine. Partially covering the vaginal opening is a thin and highly vascular fold called the hymen. Because of its structure, it tends to bleed when ruptured, especially during the first sexual intercourse or during intense physical activity. The durability of the hymen varies in women. Hence, the presence or absence of the hymen is not a reliable sign of virginity. Another organ of the reproductive system are the mammary glands. The mammary glands are found in the breast, which is anterior to the pectoral muscle. Milk glands are located within the breasts. The breasts are divided by connective tissue partitions in approximately 20 lobules. All of the glands in each lobe produce milk by acinar cells. So acinar cells, by the way, are exocrine cells. And they deliver it to the nipple via the lactiferous duct. So the hormone responsible for the milk production is prolactin. As the mother is lactating, the ampulla portion of the duct just posterior to the nipple serves as a reservoir for milk before breastfeeding. The nipple is composed of smooth muscle which responds to stimulation. Once the nipples are stimulated, this will transmit signals to the posterior pituitary gland to release oxytocin. Oxytocin not only causes uterine contractions, but also releases the milk from the breast. Another term for this is the letdown reflex. So this is an image comparing the breasts of the non-pregnant woman, the pregnant woman, and the lactating women. Now, let us talk about the regulation of the female reproductive hormones. During puberty, the hypothalamus secretes the gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which will then stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to produce and release the gonadotropic hormones, luteinizing hormone, and follicle-stimulating hormone. These two hormones will then proceed to stimulate the woman's ovaries. The follicle-stimulating hormone will then promote the development of the follicles and as well as increase estrogen secretion. Meanwhile, the luteinizing hormone stimulates the maturation of the follicle. Once the body attains high levels of luteinizing hormone, this will then trigger the event called ovulation, wherein the mature ovum is ejected from the follicle. The same hormone, the luteinizing hormone, will also cause the ruptured follicle to become the corpus luteum, which will become a source of progesterone. If the mother continues to be pregnant, then the corpus luteum will produce progesterone for a while. However, if she remains non-pregnant, this will eventually degenerate. Next, let us talk about the two main hormones of the female reproductive system. We have here estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is primarily secreted by the ovarian follicles. The placenta also plays a role in secreting estrogen. The target tissue of estrogen includes the female reproductive organs and as well as the different body tissues. This is particularly significant during puberty. Estrogen also plays a role in menstrual cycle, particularly the proliferation stage. Next, the progesterone. The progesterone is primarily secreted by the corpus luteum of the ovaries. Like estrogen, its target tissue also covers the female reproductive system and as well as the different body tissues. The main function of progesterone is to maintain the uterine lining. This is in preparation for possible fertilization and implantation. If not, this lining will be shed off during the menstrual cycle. Here, we have hormones that also play a role during pregnancy and motherhood. We have here the human chorionic gonadotropin, the oxytocin, and the prolactin. The human chorionic gonadotropin is particularly famous for being an indicator of pregnancy. This is produced by the placenta. Its target tissue is the corpus luteum of the ovaries. It maintains it when pregnancy occurs, increasing progesterone secretion during the first trimester. Oxytocin is produced in the posterior pituitary gland. It targets the uterus and the mammary glands. Its main function is to stimulate uterine contraction and as well as the letdown reflex during breastfeeding. Prolactin, which is the hormone responsible for milk production, is produced by the anterior pituitary gland. This will then influence the mammary glands to produce milk and also to develop. Now let us talk about the process of oogenesis. Compared to males who begin spermatogenesis during puberty, oogenesis in females begins at fetal development. By 4th month of development, 5 million oogonia, or immature egg cells that give rise to ova or oocytes, have already been produced. By the time of birth, all the oogonia have either degenerated or have already completed mitosis. They have also begun meiosis. Meiosis, however, stops during the first meiotic division at prophase 1. That would mean that the female already has around 2 million primary oocytes at birth. It is theorized that this will already be her lifetime supply of oocytes, and these primary oocytes will become enclosed by a single layer of cells that will form the primary follicle. These oocytes will then remain in suspended animation until the girl reaches puberty. From birth to puberty, the number of primary oocytes decrease to around 300,000 to 400,000. An average of 400 primary oocytes will actually complete development and proceed to the first stage of meiosis. This is completed every month. This will then give rise to the secondary oocytes that will eventually be released from the ovaries through a process called ovulation. The ovulated secondary oocyte is still surrounded by a follicle cell capsule called the corona rudita. This will be penetrated by the sperm during fertilization. Only then will meiosis II complete, achieving the full maturation of the ovum. So this is a picture of ovulation. As you could see, here's the liberated ovum. This is considered the secondary oocyte. This is a picture summarizing the events of fertilization. Together with this content is a video that you can view that will explain the events of fertilization. Before we wrap up, let us talk about the formation of the placenta. After fertilization, the corpus luteum in the ovary continues to function rather than atrophying. This is due to the presence of human chorionic gonadotropin. This hormone is produced by cells that are surrounding a growing embryo. HCG will stimulate the ovaries to continue producing estrogen and progesterone so that the lining of the uterus is not shed off during pregnancy. This lining will then be termed as decidua, or a thick layer of modified mucous membrane which lines the uterus during pregnancy. By 11th or 12th week, chorionic villi reach out from the trophoblast cells in the endometrium to begin formation of an organ called the placenta. The placenta will then attach itself to the uterus and function to provide oxygen and nutrients to the growing fetus. The placenta will also aid in the removal of waste products from the fetal blood. By the 3rd month, placenta assumes the role of producing estrogen and progesterone while the ovaries remain inactive.